all day, every day with people that are landowners that don't want this turnpike and say that they've been treated poorly. But how many of you have had your door beaten down by somebody who has had their property taken and they're saying, no, they treated me like a king. I came out ahead. This was an amazing process. I haven't heard of anybody. So, you know, where's those letters of recommendation saying, yeah, they treated us fantastic? So that's what I'm advocating for here is I think OTA probably has something like this. If they don't, they should implement it. We've got a really good guide going over here at ODOT. I'm really not sure why we don't have this posted on the OTA website for landowners. And we should probably have a resource guide that shows them where to find stuff like that so that they know that they are being treated fairly. Because if they are being treated fairly, then this would prove it. Then they could back that up and say, look, this is our policies. But unfortunately, that's kind of one of my asks here is that there are really just not a lot of policies and procedures listed anywhere on OTA's website. So the landowners are just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and we can't prove whether the OTA is doing what they're supposed to do or not. And the OTA can't either. And so that puts everybody in a bad position. That's what leads to court cases, because people don't trust. And if you have checks and balances, you have a checklist, then the OTA can say, look, no, I did all the things I was supposed to do. And the landowner's going to go, okay, I give. You're right. You did everything you're supposed to do. So I'm not going to push this to condemnation. But when you don't have those checks and balances, you have to hire an attorney to make sure that all the checks have been checked, because otherwise you don't have access to that. And you don't even know what to ask for, because, I mean, a lot of these people, you saw Mr. Mayfield this morning, he's lived in his house for 32 years. He hasn't moved in decades, so he's not going to be thinking about, you know, all the costs that are associated with moving and all this stuff. So anyway, hold on, let's move on to my next slide because I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what I'm saying here is we've got this imbalance of power. We've got the OTA has all of these resources, and landowners have very few resources available to them. They have to hire their attorneys out of pocket. And so my ask of the legislature is, let's right this imbalance of power. Let's put the landowner back at the top, because it was our land to begin with, right? Like, we bought it, it was our investment. And then our legislators need to be telling the OTA, hey, look, you can do better. And maybe we just need to give them some tools for their toolbox. I promise you, they're good people. If they had more tools to better compensate a landowner, I think they would be more than happy to take them. It's just they apparently need some help getting that going, or maybe they just don't know that these are gaps that are missing that they need to fill in. So that's what I want to work on. I'll let you read that slide later because it's longer, but that's basically what I just said. That's my kiddo when he was 4, standing in our fields of wildflowers. And you can see here, Thomas Jefferson, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. And so that's what I'm asking for, is more transparency. We need policies and procedures that are specific to hold both sides accountable to whether they're being followed or not. We need them posted publicly at all times on all 4 of their websites. I don't care. It needs to be very easily accessible. I actually have landowners that call me that don't have smartphones. They don't have computers. If they don't see it come on Channel 9 or Channel 4 or Channel 5, they don't know it's happening. And I literally have a list of 2 landowners who have said, I don't have access to any other information. If it doesn't come in the paper, and if it's not on 4, 5, or 9, I don't get it. So will you please call me if something comes up that you think I need to know about? Like, I'm happy to do it for her, but I shouldn't have to. It's not my responsibility. I'm not taking her property. The OTA is. And then last but not least, well, there's my kiddo again. And that eagle is that was taken also in our yard. We had 5 bald eagles flying around our pond and hanging out at our house this past spring. It was pretty neat to see. They even fly in tandem with their wings. Like, it's pretty amazing. And their nest is right over there where the South Extension interchange is going to go. So hopefully they don't lose their nest, and then I don't have my bald eagles, because that will make me very unhappy. So anyway, so that is the last of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Representative Grego, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I too am a landowner in southeast Oklahoma. I've been in debt my entire life. I get a chance to buy places, I go borrow money. I've never seen an appraisal, ever. When I ask about it, I'm explained whoever pays for the appraisal owns the appraisal. If you want an appraisal, you can go get you one made.
Yeah.
So could you not do that in this situation?
Yes, we could, and those are about $1,500 a piece.
Absolutely.
And the landowners that I have spoken with have said that they have had a really hard time finding an appraiser who will take their, will actually work for them because they already work for the OTA, and it's a conflict of interest. So even locating an outside independent appraiser has been a real issue for a lot of landowners that I've talked to. So yeah, it is hard. And the OTA is coming and taking our house. If I wanted to go buy a house, yeah, I'm expecting that I'm going to have an appraisal, and I'm planning for that. I'm sitting away, $1,500 because I know that's going to be part of the cost of moving. These people didn't ask for that. So the Turnpike Authority is coming and saying, oh, you don't need an attorney. You don't need any of these other people. We've got you. Our right-of-way agent is going to take care of you. Well, but that right-of-way agent isn't giving you all the things that you need. So you are still out money to try to represent yourself.
Thank you for that answer.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Have you ever dealt with oil and gas company on taking your land?
That's a tricky question.
No? It's a very simple question. Have you ever dealt with an oil and gas company when they come to take your land?
I've been on the other side of that. Yes.
In my opinion, this is not a question. You have no rights. They come to you.
Yes.
They take your land. They write you a check. That's the end of it. So at least with what you're doing here is there are some negotiations, aren't there?
Yeah, they're in negotiations with oil and gas too. I can assure you of that. I can tell you firsthand that there are. But also with oil and gas, they're not taking anybody's house.
Follow up.
They may not take your house, but they may run a road right next to your bedroom window and haul semis up and down it all day and night.
I agree, and
is that different than taking your house?
No, that is egregious, and I think they should be compensated for that. Like I said, a lot of what I've said today about property rights, it applies to other industries. It's eminent domain and period. It's protecting private property rights across all of these different agencies and entities that have the ability to come in and take and use something that is private property. So no, I don't think it's limited to just the OTA.
Representative Cross-Whitehater, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This may be to Ms. Wilson or it may be to Mr. E. Kelly. I'm curious about the appraisal report. I'm curious about just what you would say about why you wouldn't get it. Also, I am curious if anyone has ever had these property not bought, if that appraisal is actually used against them and their taxes are raised because of it.
No.
So I'm curious, well, if that's a possibility I can see.
I haven't heard any. I actually did look at, I can't remember what the governing body is, but it's the National whatever appraisers body. I bought their handbook. I've been reading the handbook, so I know how, and I have the policies and procedures right here that say how they're supposed to do it. And one thing that I did notice is that they do have to list in the appraisal report, the appraiser has to state in the report who the intended users are of the report, and in all of the instances of the reports that I have seen, they all say for the OTA, for Poe and Associates, and for whatever right-of-way company is interacting with the landowner, that they are not for the landowner. But the landowner is not told that they should get an appraisal or that they need to get their own appraisal. That only comes into the question when they ask, why can't I have a copy of this? And then it's mentioned, well, you could get your own, but again, where are they going to come up with that money? And so then I asked the right-of-way agent, okay, so if the landowner does cough up the $1,500 and they are able to find an appraiser that can come and do it, that doesn't have a conflict of interest, and then, will they get reimbursed for that? And he said, sometimes they can work that into their counteroffer. I didn't ask you to come take my property. Why should I, if you're telling me that this person is a liaison and that they're working on my behalf, then why are they not sharing the materials of the information that they have with the landowner? Because it's probably because it's not actually for the landowner. It's for the OTA.
So to follow up,
Go ahead.
to be clear, then you would like legislation that they have to give the appraisal at the time they come to you to discuss the land change.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking for. I think that's a critical piece of information that a landowner needs to be able to know whether it was a fair offer. And if they don't feel it's a fair offer, then that gives them a starting place for where do I need to negotiate? Is it because they forgot to include the storm shelter? Is it because they didn't, account for new blinds or whatever it is? I don't know. But at least it gives the landowner a place to start and go, oh, well, that makes sense where they came up with that. This is maybe something we could ask for, but they don't even know what to ask for because they don't know what was included and what wasn't.
Then, Mr. Chair, can I ask Mr. E. Kelly why, if we could, Director?
Director E. Kelly, you're recognized.
If you would address her question, why not give it in the first place? Also, I am curious about property going up. And then also, just since I already have you back up there, if you will address that she said your goal was to be the cheapest cost and the fastest to get property changed. Can you address that as well?
So the first part of that question about the appraisal report, I would love to defer to our Chief of Right-of-Way, Todd Gore, if that would be okay with the chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you. So the appraisal standards across the board, we've never really provide those just to, like she mentioned, the size of those appraisals. And so to provide to all, like driving forward is over 900 at minimum 70 pages. This amount of paper and all of that, they're reduced out of that. And that is the main reason we don't. And as soon as they ask for it, we provide them the full appraisal report. And we'll provide that to the landowner that we're negotiating with during that negotiation process, and to be upfront with them.
Yeah, go ahead.
So to follow up then with you, to be clear, you're not saying that you would necessarily see a problem with that being an upfront provided document when you go into beginning to discuss with a homeowner or landowner what you're going to do?
It's just the burden of the size of volume is the challenge to it. But I mean, is it practical to do? I mean, possible to do? Yes. It's just the volume of paperwork to do it.
It's possible to do electronically.
It's once we wouldn't be able to necessarily up front because sometimes, as mentioned, not everybody has emails or will provide emails to us, and we'd have to have an email address to provide them electronically. That would be a great option if we had everybody communicate emails with us, but again, that wouldn't be necessarily up front sometimes because that first contact, as mentioned, is more the appraisal process and things like that. But if we had that, that's something you could look at, yes.
And then if I can, one more just on the appraisal. Can you tell us how long it typically, and I'm sure there's not a real typical, but how long it takes you to get that appraisal ready? I may have to defer to phone a friend of what it takes to get that ready so that you're ready to go forward with negotiations, even to have discussions. What does an appraisal take? Because I know, like closing on a home, you've got to give a month.
We average 30 days for the appraisal process, for your site visit, for them to prepare. As mentioned, it's a very large volume appraisal, and it's a very thorough appraisal. So they go through about 30 days to provide that appraisal. Then, as mentioned earlier, we have that second review, and that usually takes 2 weeks for them to review it. So by the time we are engaged with them and the landowner and the start of the appraisal process to the time we send that offer is closer to almost 60 days.
One more. Thank you, and I promise I'll quit. With the appraisals, sometimes when you're working them up, is that help you determine that you're not even going to go forward and have negotiations with that landowner because the appraisal, when it comes back to you all, it's clear it's not going to be workable for the road?
No, the appraisal has no bearing on whether we buy a property or not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Hey, Todd, you want to answer this question? So one last question that she had asked.
Sure. Yes.
She asked about speed. I don't remember exactly how it was phrased,
It
but
was cheapest cost and the fastest you can go.
do you want to answer, talk about the...
That never comes into play. That we always take our time with the process, we negotiate with them, and try to reach those best numbers. We're not trying to get the cheapest. We're not trying to get that. We are trying to get the fair, appropriate price, and with that negotiation, speed and cost doesn't come into that.
Yes, Yes, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to check with Director Kelly. Is there anything that Kelly mentioned in her presentation that maybe you would like to address? I think this is the platform that would take place.
So thank you for being recognized to address just one thing that was stated. You know, and I do understand that Todd is just trying to provide not burden somebody with a lot of information. But again, just as he said, we do provide the full document when somebody asks for it. I would like to learn about a case where somebody was only received a few of the pages. I would like to know about that. One thing, though, that was stated was that the Turnpike Authority purchases surplus property for profit. That
No, not surplus. Sorry.
we purchase extra property and then we turn around and sell it and somehow make money. The Turnpike Authority did acquire surplus property through negotiated settlements with property owners for the last bond program. Between 2018 and 2021, we surplus 530 acres, and this was all across all of the Driving Forward program and included some other parcels. We surplused and actually sold 336 acres. The sale price versus the purchase price, we paid right at $7.4 million. We sold for 6.3. So we purchased higher than they sold at an auction. And what I want to capture there is, you know, we do, I think those of us in here that have been to an auction before, that is the best price you're going to get on the day for the people that were advertised to be there. We do a really good job. We've used Day-Kill Auction before. We've done some online auctions just the same way that the DOT does. We've had lots of people show up for those auctions from all over the state. They'd even do online bidding, and we don't ever get back. We have a few places, but we don't usually get back on the overall sum. We don't get back the money that we've paid for the parcels. Just wanted to address that. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Director Kelly. Members, any other questions? Okay, need to move right along. Thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. Representative, go ahead.
Okay, our next presenter will be Mayor Homan. Mayor will be talking about lack of, or the collaboration or the lack of there. That's a popular word between myself and Director Kelly. And with local governments, stakeholders, and communities. So Mayor Homan, welcome, and it's your time.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here and taking your time this afternoon. I appreciate being invited to come speak today about this. Based on my experience as mayor of Norman, but also as a city council member for 12 years in Norman. I'm also a fourth generation of my family to grow up in Norman, and although I didn't grow up in the rural east side of Norman, I did grow up on the east side of Norman, and I've spent a lot of time at Lake Thunderbird, and I've had many friends who have lived in the rural country part of Norman. And for those of you that are familiar with Norman, as I know Senator Standridge is, people think of Norman as the University of Oklahoma and the campus area and the historic neighborhoods and things like that, and maybe the mall and the mile of cars on I-35. I don't know that a lot of folks think of Norman as being 200 square miles. We're the 50th largest city in the United States in land area. And as a comparison, Norman and Tulsa are the same size in land area, but Tulsa has 400,000 people and we have about 130,000. So most of Norman is rural and country and farmland, properties that have been passed down for multiple generations, predating statehood, going back to the land run. And a lot of folks who live in Norman really love the diversity of the geography that we have in Norman. They love that we have the old campus area and the historic districts, and love that we have the rural area that's about 5-minute drive east of downtown Norman. You can be at City Hall and then be out in the country and go enjoy nature and go around the trails in the park and things like that. And in my experience as an elected official in Norman for almost 2 decades, I started watching city council meetings, I've mentioned, when I was in 6th grade in middle school in Norman. I was always real fascinated with city planning, and when you watch city council meetings on TV, you see presentations for development projects or road construction projects, and I always thought it was so fascinating to watch those meetings and know what was being built. When you drive around town, you see a construction site, and it's one of the biggest questions I always get from constituents and family members especially. I'll get a text that's like, so what's being built on the corner of 12th and I just thought it was so interesting and fascinating to know what it was because I saw it in a city council meeting. And so I've been following local government and politics in Norman for a long time, for most of my life. And as an elected official, in my experience, the residents of Norman who live in rural East Norman do so for a reason. They could live anywhere else in the metro, most likely. They could live on the west side of Norman, next to I-35. They could live in Moore. They could live in Oklahoma City or Edmond and have a more convenient drive to downtown OKC or whatever. But the folks that live in rural East Norman do so because that is the way of life that they want. They want the rural character and the peacefulness and the nature. And they want to be close to the things in town that they need. If they want to come and go to OU and go to a football game, or they need to do shopping or things like that. But they enjoy that rural character and that peace of mind. And over again, I've heard from Norman residents out there that if they wanted a faster route to Oklahoma City, that's not where they would live. And so that's been my experience. And when it comes to collaboration, the main issue that I've had is that I was first elected to city council in 2013. I was in my 20s and young, and like I mentioned, I've always been fascinated with city planning and transportation and data that's related to traffic counts and speeds and whether widening streets is really effective or if it just creates more traffic and things like that. And I've been chair of the City Council's Community Planning and Transportation Committee since 2016. And my first knowledge of this proposal was on February 22nd, I think it was, opening up Facebook on my phone and seeing a post from former Ward 5 council member in Norman, Rashard Tortorello. He posted the announcement that had been made by OTA on his Facebook page. And that was my first knowledge of this whole plan and what was going to happen. And my immediate reaction was, how could we have not known about this? How could we as council members and elected officials in Norman not have known about this plan before it's being announced and I'm seeing it on Facebook? I was upset, like the rest of council was, with our city staff about, if you knew about this, why didn't you tell us? Reading about something like that on Facebook and seeing the chaos that ensued, the responses, people being very emotional, thinking, oh, my house is in that path. What am I going to do? What does this mean? And not knowing anything about it, not having anything prepared for how to respond to the questions that we started getting about that. So that was very troubling. And my recommendation for how to address that type of thing is a little dance club going on in here. My recommendation for that really was that, when we're talking about something like this that is a massive proposal that involves so many different properties, potential use of eminent domain, the impact to the watershed in Norman. Lake Thunderbird is an impaired body of water. It is a classified impaired body of water, as it is right now without a bunch of development around it and just having Highway 9 to the south, which does not drain into it. But this new turnpike, the east and west and the north and south, would drain into the Lake Thunderbird watershed. And so every piece of debris, every vehicle accident, and there's liquid from the vehicle that gets onto that roadway, will be washed directly into the Little River and right into Lake Thunderbird. And so that's one of my biggest concerns there as well, is the environmental impact and the fact that if the lake is already impaired, how is building a turnpike next to it, two different legs of it, going to possibly improve that situation? And what I would have liked to have seen would have been an announcement years ago, 5 years ago, that said, as OTA, as a statewide program, we are considering the future of turnpikes and highways and transportation in central Oklahoma. And we want to meet with each community individually and talk about what that means for each community. We don't have a map drawn. We don't have routes selected. We want to see what would work best for each of your communities. Is there even support in your communities for this? Do you want this? Is this part of your transportation plans to address traffic by having a turnpike? I can tell you in Norman, it's not. We created the first ever master transportation plan for the city of Norman in 2014. Norman had never had a transportation plan before, and if you've driven in Norman, you can probably tell that, right? So we do now, and that plan that was passed in 2014 made no mention of an outer loop or a turnpike. The city did not plan at all to address traffic in Norman by building a loop around the east and north sides of Norman. Our new long-range land development plan does not call for developing Norman all the way out to the lake. Our plan calls for making better use, actually, of the existing developed area that we have in Norman. Vacant lots, parking lots, single-story strip malls that may be half or almost all vacant that could be good candidates to be redeveloped in the future for a higher density, more intense use. So our goal in Norman is to preserve the rural character of East Norman, preserve the Lake Thunderbird watershed, and grow Norman by making better use of the existing infrastructure and space that we've already built out. And a turnpike is not part of our plans in Norman. But it would have been great to have been able to have that conversation with OTA and the state before a route was published and a whole plan was published, as though it's a done deal. We didn't collaborate with you at all. Here's the plan that we're going forward. And if you're in the path, then too bad. You can accept the offer we give you, or we're going to take your property against your will. And I've had people, just recently, when the new alignment was announced in September, I had a 100% disabled veteran who lives out in Ward 5 in rural Norman who emailed my office and said, I'm a 100% disabled veteran, and I just built this house out here 4 years ago, a year before this plan was announced. And this new alignment is now going through my house. What am I going to do? I'm a disabled veteran. I've just built this is where I was going to, this is it for me. And now I'm going to have to pack up and build another house, or what am I supposed to do? That's the type of people in Norman that are being impacted by this. And since the announcement of the plan, OTA has come to Norman and had some town halls. But once you get to that point, the residents are angry, and they're not wanting to negotiate how you can make it better. They are against it in its entirety. If the collaboration should have happened before, and if it had, maybe there would have been a different outcome. I don't know that that would have convinced people to want to give up their property, though. But now you get to a point where you announce this plan, you show a route that's going through people's homes and properties, and then you want them to come to a town hall meeting and negotiate or speak, respectfully to you about what they would like to see happen. How can they make losing their property more palatable? For many people, there is no amount of money you can offer them for what they'll be losing. And I work in real estate, and I can tell you for sure that if you have 5 acres in East Norman and your house is being taken, you are not going to find another 5 acres in Norman city limits for that same value. You will not. And I doubt you will in the entire metro area. You would have to maybe go out to Paul's Valley or somewhere pretty far from the metro to find that same property. In Norman, we are experiencing a shortage of housing. Housing in Norman has gotten really expensive, and people are not wanting to move because if you move, you're going to have to, one, pay more interest. Probably interest rates are higher than probably what your current house is mortgaged at. And so that's the type of stuff that I get feedback from in Norman from residents. And I will tell you, too, that from a policy standpoint, this issue has been the single thing that I have seen bring people together and cross partisan political divisions. more than anything I've ever seen at the local level. People who you have a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, Independent, all living next to each other on the same street, and all their houses are in the path of this. They have all come together because they're all being threatened by the same thing. And I've seen it supersede in the mayoral election, for example. We had 4 city council elections and a mayoral election in February. Every candidate who ran on opposing this plan and supporting the residents of Norman who are being impacted won their election. Every candidate who said they supported it or thought it could be a good idea or that it would be good for Norman lost, including our former mayor. I ended up winning that election by 62% over an incumbent mayor. And when you look at the election map in rural East Norman, I overwhelmingly won that area, almost every precinct. People who politically, their personal political views were much more aligned with the former mayor. They would have had every reason to vote to re-elect him based on partisan political views. But I didn't go around promising people that if I'm elected mayor, I'm going to stop the turnpike. That would be unrealistic of me and I think would be a bad idea. But I just ran on a platform that I don't support this, and as mayor, I will do everything I can to have your back as residents of Norman who are fighting this. And as like I said, the former mayor was viewed as being in favor of it, or at least apathetic to it. And that was the #1 issue in that election, was the turnpike. The turnpike, the entertainment arena district in Norman, and homelessness were the 3 biggest issues, but that turnpike issue was the one that I heard from doors all across the city of Norman. People that are not in the path of it, people that live on the complete opposite side of the city who are not going to be impacted by it at all, but were very concerned about those who are, or they have a family member or their friend or something like that who is going to be in the path of it. And so I really just wanted to help paint a little bit of a picture about what this has been like in our community, how it's really helped bring a lot of people in our community together, people who were not active in government issues, were not active in local things at City Hall at all, people who were retired and could have very well just spent the rest of their time relaxing and kicking back, but have been compelled to get involved and come to City Hall and attend all the OTA board meetings and come up here to the Capitol and speak to you because they're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for the thing that is most important to them in their entire life, and that's their home and their property. And so the collaboration part, again, I would just ask that in future endeavors when it comes to OTA, especially when it's involving taking people's property, I think the collaboration should start before there is a map drawn and routes made and all those decisions are made. There needs to be collaboration with the communities impacted at an early start before, and then you develop routes and different things like that if you're going to do it. But that would be my recommendation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Holman. Members, any questions? Representative Sterling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along that vein, you was talking about you felt like the collaboration should have started sooner, et cetera. Once the collaborations did start, what was your perception, your thoughts?
Was this is going to happen, there's nothing you can do about it, and all you can try to do is make it less painful. Or tell us where you want the route to go. But then you're asking residents to say, okay, well, I don't want it on my house, but if you put it over here, it'll save me, but it'll take somebody else's house. So you're asking residents to do that, and I found that very difficult, especially after a route is already established. But that's what I would really just, and that, again, like I said, it doesn't mean that if you start early that people are going to be, okay, well, you started early and came to me early, so now I'm okay with this. People will still be opposed to it most likely. But when you just publish the route and it looks like, and you're told this is a done deal, the OTA can't be stopped, it's never been stopped, there's nothing you can do about it, that gets people really angry. And then when you try to have, like I was saying, you try to have a town hall after that and put maps on the table, people aren't wanting to have a cordial discussion with the OTA representatives at that point, and that's what we've seen. It's been very hostile when they've had these meetings in Norman after the fact. And so I don't know that it's been productive after the fact because of that. It's very emotional, and it's, I think, unrealistic in those settings to ask residents who are losing their homes to check their emotion about it at the door.
You're recognized.
About the collaboration piece, you said, Stu started earlier and people were very upset. But the process itself with OTA, in your opinion, your perception, did you feel like there was a true sense of wanting to collaborate with the city on behalf of the OTA? Or what's your thoughts there?
I personally did not feel that way, that there was a great effort of collaboration with the city of Norman, and that's not the feedback I've heard from other or is the feedback I've heard from other communities that have dealt with, that have had OTA come through, is that very little to no collaboration with the communities beforehand, and then after it's been, we're coming through, there's nothing you can do about it, and so negotiate with us on whether you want frontage roads or interchanges or whatnot, but otherwise it's going through and you just need to accept it. And so that's a tough position to start in from our end, from our residents, from elected officials, to be told that, so our community doesn't support this, our community doesn't want it. I don't believe that it will resolve any traffic issues in Norman. I would argue that it will increase traffic on I-35 where it crosses I-35 at Indian Hills Road, because it'll be dumping more cars on I-35 to go north to Oklahoma City. That'll still be the only route to go to downtown OKC is I-35 between Norman and downtown. So that, that's the feedback I've heard from other communities, is there isn't collaboration. It's, this is what's going to happen, and you can accept it, and if you work with us, we will put in an interchange here where you want it, and that might help with economic development if you work with us. Or if you want a 10-foot multimodal path, we'll put that in and pay for it for you. Those types of things, but never is the discussion, do you even want this in your community? Will it help? Here's our data, traffic data that'll show how it'll help you. None of that. And so that's been my experience with it.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Director Kelly, just like we did before, is there anything brought up in this presentation that you, okay, just want to give you that opportunity. Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, I'll just say the OTA officials have been very respectful to us and willing to meet with the city of Norman, our staff, talking about infrastructure that may be impacted, like water wells, our emergency siren system, and things like that could be impacted. Any other infrastructure. They've been respectful and willing to talk with our staff about those things. So I don't want to act like there's been no communication or no collaboration. There has been, but it just comes down to the basic thing of the whole principle of the entire plan, in my opinion. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Representative Sterling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And our next presenter will be Amy Serrato. She'll be addressing public engagement and sunsetting authorizations. Amy, you are recognized.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for inviting us to do an interim study. My name is Amy Serrato, and I'm a professional engineer, civil engineer in Oklahoma, professor of geotechnical engineering at the university, and president of Oklahomans for Responsible Transportation, which kicked off 3.5 years ago to try to understand what the heck was going on with this new route through Cleveland County. I was also an originally impacted homeowner that was going to lose all 10 of my acres and home that I lived in for 20 years. But now that the route has changed, I'm no longer directly impacted, but I'm still here in the fight because I do think that we could make our statutes much, much stronger for the citizens of Oklahoma. My interim study talk in 2022 was all about sunsetting authorizations and policy, and I agree with Mayor Holman that as from a civil engineering standpoint, how the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority does business is not okay, and it doesn't have anything to do with national international standards. The lack of communication with the municipalities is completely detrimental to local and regional transportation planning. And the transportation planning that went on for this southern extension and east-west connector makes absolutely no traffic justification sense, no economic sense, no environmental sense. And I talked at length at that, so I didn't want to repeat what I went over 3.5 years ago. But I do have some more information for you, because it seems like the citizen swell is headed towards protecting private property rights through eminent domain across the state, not only from the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, but from solar, from wind, from electrical. And so I was supposed to give an eminent domain interim study last week. It didn't work out, and so I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we need to strengthen our eminent domain policies, and then Rob Norman is going to follow up with all the legal stuff. But I'm going to focus a little bit on how OTA is behaving and versus what other states do that really protect their citizens from unnecessary and unjustified takes. Okay, so when I was doing all this research in the last 3.5 years, first of all, I had never even heard of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority before. Even as a civil engineer, I worked for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, but I'd never driven on a turnpike because I wasn't driving to Tulsa, and I didn't have to go down to southeastern Oklahoma, so I really was on rural roads working on the subgrades, and I never really heard of eminent domain, and that sounds awful because it seems like the only way we get involved in anything is if we're directly impacted, and that's about anything, I guess. But ever since then, I've been researching, and I publish a Substack which has over 100 articles that are factual about open record requests, and I've learned some things about eminent domain. And it seems that the legislature is really keen on making eminent domain harder to do from a condemner standpoint, and to strengthen it from the public. But for some reason, we can't get those great bills heard in committee. There was a great one written by Kevin West and Nathan Dahm a few years ago that had to do with public use and blighted properties, and it didn't go anywhere. And I think that we need to revisit some of that. I also started looking at what other states do and how they handle just compensation, and I think we could do a much better job than fair market value, and I'll show you some real data as I get through the presentation. Okay, so just to remind everybody, the U.S. Constitution and eminent domain. How do we define just compensation? So the Fifth Amendment says you can take private property, but you have to pay just compensation. And then they talk about due process, and the 14th Amendment has a due process clause. Now, just for your information, I think the use of eminent domain should be abolished. So you know where I'm coming from. I don't even think we should use it anymore. But since I know that's not going to happen, let's make it a little bit more protective for the citizen. Many states, let's talk about just compensation first. Many states, including Oklahoma, define just compensation as fair market value. And the statute actually reads, just compensation shall mean the value of the property taken, and in addition, any injury to any part of the property not taken. Some states allow additional damages, but there are a few states that really make the homeowner whole. In other words, when they have their property taken by eminent domain, they leave and they can go to an equal property, and nothing's equal, right? But at least very close. They're not out money, and I think that the state of Oklahoma should really think about that. Let's talk about those other states. Minnesota allows for replacement cost. Indiana gives 125% of fair market value for agricultural land and 150% for residential occupied land. Missouri is 125 for the homestead takings. That's, homestead is when you own the home, and you can, you limit your property tax increases to 3% and things like that, and 150% of fair market value for certain agricultural property. They also have this heritage value provision that says they give you more money if you've owned it in the same family for more than 50 50 years. There are a lot of families being drugged through the eminent domain process in Norman right now that have been on their land for that long. Michigan says you can't pay less than 125%. Rhode Island says, well, you can pay me 150% of that, but you're going to take it for economic development. And Oklahoma says that's illegal. But those are just some of the numbers. And so I wanted to go through how the OTA handles just compensation. So I had class this morning, so I didn't get a chance to listen to all of the presentations, but I'm assuming that they said that most of the properties that were taken were negotiated. So this is data from the Kickapoo, and of the 104 properties taken on the Kickapoo, 44 owners had to threaten court action before receiving a higher compensation. And so that means that the original offer came in, they said no. The commissioner's offer, 3 appraisers came in, they said no, and then they had to take them to court. Of those people that took them to court, you can see that the final award more than doubles. And so the OTA will say, well, you know, they use the excuse, we don't have enough money, or that's to the roadway. I think we'll talk a little bit about this later. We can't put the southern extension out to the east side of the lake because it's going to cost us too much money. That's not an excuse, because the contractors and the engineering consultants are change ordered to death and get paid what they want to get paid, and the Oklahoma homeowner is on the losing side of that. You can see that in one case, a homeowner got 610% of the commissioner's offer. So what I want our policy to say across the board is that eminent domain, if you're going to take it, you have to really want it, and it has to have a public use, and you have to prove necessity, but you need to pay for it. And so why is the OTA forcing the families to go to court to be made whole? I don't think that's a fair process. And here's some numbers for you on the east-west connector. You heard Mayor Holman say a 5-acre property in Norman, you'll never find it again. Well, that's true. Well, we had some homeowners reach out and say, I don't know what to do. I can't afford to buy another house. And so you can see that the OTA's offer and the average, the comparable sales was $35,000 to $16,000 lower than what was for sale in town at the time. How much would the homeowner have to be out to purchase a comparable home? $63,000, $22,000. These are just 2. I have a lot more data than this. As a civil engineer and a fiscal conservative, you know, we spend taxpayer money. We have to be fiscally conservative. I just have a real problem with the fact that these homeowners, and roadways typically across the country go through persistently impoverished areas. That's how you change a community. You build a road through it. And that's how it's been since Robert Moses destroyed New York with his turnpikes. And the broader issue is that the OTA is stripping generational wealth. Pay the people. If you want the road, pay them. Don't make them take you to court. A lot of people don't have it. We have disabled veterans. We have people, my neighbor, she's $800 a month on Social Security. There's no money for lawyers and to do all that. So we need to change the eminent domain laws to stop this predatory behavior. And I say this because the OTA has never hit their budget on any project in the last 2 decades. So the east-west connector in March of 2022 was supposed to be $49 million per mile. Currently, on their website, they say it's $107 million per mile. That's a 104% increase, and they haven't even put a shovel in the ground. So we're talking what is it, $3 billion, and they can't pay a homeowner an extra $65,000 to have them go be able to buy a house within 10 miles of where they are. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And the Southern Extension changed from $33.8 million per mile to $53.9 million per mile. They're going to come up and tell you that's inflation. I would say it's bad budgeting, and it's probably going to cost a lot more than that. Now, I don't have the exact numbers, but the Driving Forward program, which the Kickapoo was part of, I think went 40 to 50% over budget, and they actually ran out of money, and that's why they're widening the Turner with the access money right now. Okay, so back to the U.S. Constitution and eminent domain. What's public use? Oklahoma led the country in 2006 with public use, with a Supreme Court case that said you cannot take land for economic development. You have to prove that it's truly a public use. There are other states that have a much worse situation, but since 2006, our statutes have not changed very much, and I'll show you a slide of what Oklahoma has done since then and what we need to do to make that stronger. And Rob's going to talk a lot more about the public use. So I want to talk about how the OTA defines public use, because they're telling everybody the quiet part out loud. And I want to tell you that from a civil engineering perspective, I firmly believe that the new turnpikes are strictly about economic development. The original statute language, and we can read it, says that the turnpike's mission, or in the statute, that they will connect communities. They won't ring them. Ringing cities is a bad design that was stopped by the Federal Highway Administration decades ago. We don't ring cities. We don't ring cities. The only reason you would ring a city like the Kilpatrick is to promote economic development. So in their press releases, in the chamber agenda, in their mission statement, public use was never meant to mean private opportunity. So I want to say and show this. I don't know how I would play it from here, but Mr. Kelly, back in 2022, talks about Indian Hills. Can you play it for me?
So we moved there to the least impactful and developable area, but I think and that is to use the existing Indian Hill Road as a westbound frontage. Build a new turnpike just south of that, which will have be a four-lane divided facility. And then on the south side of that, make an eastbound frontage road. So there's one-way frontage on each side. If you want an example of what that looks like, that's like Memorial Road and the John Kilpatrick one here on the north side of the city.
Okay, so it's already known that developers have bought all along that property well before the announcement. And so Indian Hills is an economic development boon. The traffic counts that I could show you don't justify the east-west connector. In fact, the revenue study is about $10 billion in debt after the 30 years, if I remember Cheryl's numbers correctly. So it doesn't even it's not revenue positive. So what else could it be for? And the other thing is, I wanted to address why the Southern Extension doesn't go east of the lake. And it was said, well, it's too long. Well, actually, it's because the Turnpike Authority wants to help the city of Norman bust out the zoning laws in East Norman. And that's why the closer they keep it to the west side of the lake, the better. So east side of the lake will not have any local traffic, and they won't be picking up any developers along there. So they need to keep it as close to town as possible. So it's all about economic development. And I talk about the memo from Bellman's office that talks about the OTA and economic development and the feasibility studies. Wendy Smith wrote a memo to the board saying it's all about economic development. So this so I'm not sure why we're allowing this to occur. Mayor Holman said that they didn't really, didn't have a lot of municipal collaboration. But where they need municipal collaboration is to come in and build the service roads. So by statute, they have to get a resolution of cooperation. And this is Moore's resolution of cooperation. Thankfully, the city of Norman denied one. But the additional economic development opportunities, economic development. So everything's about economic development. The Oklahoma counties was like this too, and we've talked to the commissioners afterwards, and they said they made a big mistake. A big mistake. The Cleveland County Commissioners are about to find out how big of a mistake they made too, because it's going to increase our property taxes immensely in Cleveland County to pay for those service roads. And I don't think any of those 3 commissioners are going to make it through the next election. The public use, again, this is all developer purchased. I want to talk about a little bit those red ODOT purchases around the Indian Hills. This was purchased with federal tax dollars using the Uniform Relocation Act to buy out these properties. These properties made a ton of money. And you know when they bought them, 2021, before any of this was known publicly. And by the way, the $16 million used to purchase these properties weren't in the 8-year ODOT construction plan. So we're still skeptical of how that happened. But you can see that all the developers along the east-west that they purchased within 2 or 3 years of when the east-west connector was announced to the public. Okay, so the other thing that really struck me was, how does the OTA prove necessity of the taking for public use? You have to prove necessity. Well, how the OTA proves necessity, the state gave them the sovereign power of eminent domain, and they just write a resolution of necessity and pass it. They say, I'm going to take your land, and then they go and do it. But other states make the condemner go to court and have a jury trial about proving that they have the necessity to take the land. I think we need to do that. And the OTA says that condemning land is the most serious thing they do, but they've made a ton of mistakes on the east-west connector. In fact, they wrote a resolution of necessity and passed it before they had even contacted the homeowners to negotiate a settlement. The first time the homeowners heard about the condemnation was through my Substack. That's unacceptable. Negotiations have to happen before you go to condemnation, and the OTA must be held to higher standards when it comes to proving the necessity. So how do other states prove necessity, and what I think we need to add to our statutes? Wisconsin says you have to hold a necessity hearing. Minnesota says you have to have a public hearing. For judicial and administration review of necessity, Michigan has a Uniform Condemnation Procedures Act. The property's owner can challenge the necessity, and courts must review it. And this is not just a judge. This is by jury. I feel like if a person is condemned to death, they have to be condemned to death by a jury of their peers. And in our Constitution, life, liberty, and property are equal. If you want to take my property, you must prove it with a jury of my peers. You have to show the necessity through a jury trial. You cannot just write some resolution of necessity and have your rubber stamping board say yes. In Ohio, there was a great Supreme Court case just around the time we had a Supreme Court case. And in Pennsylvania, they proved public purpose and necessity also through a trial situation. So I would like to see us add that to our statutes. The best practices from across the nation. Banning private gain takings. We already do that. We have that in our 2006 Supreme Court case, so we're good on that. But we didn't do a very good job of defining blight. And blight is when a city can say, I don't like the way that that house looks, I'm going to take it and do something else with it, get a better tax burden. So we need to define blight narrowly. I'm telling you that Kevin West and Nathan Dahm had a great bill that defined that blight as, like other states did, parcel-specific findings. And and it was great. We should resurrect that and try to get that through committee to talk about it. Ensuring fair pre-suit process. You need to get a good offer. Stop making people go to court to get that good offer. Right of first refusal. We had great right of first refusal, and we screwed it up in 2024, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We need to expand compensation, mandate independent appraisals, and then just increasing transparency. So how specifically might we do this? So this is what we did in our state. So just so the legislators know, I went back through all the bills and all the laws, and we have done 4 things since our state rejected the Kelo New London SCOTUS opinion in 2005 in their 2006 Lowry versus Muskogee County Commissioners. We strengthened the right of first refusal in 2011. We strengthened the 2012, we wrote the Landowners Bill of Rights. We gave better groundwater rights and protections in 2020, and we worked on fee shifting, meaning that if I take the condemner to court and I win, they have to pay all of my legal fees, and they have to pay what I'm out, and the fees of my money that's been sitting in the court system. But what we did badly is, for some reason, we rolled back our right of first refusal in our House Bill 3159. We put an exemption clause that created a loophole allowing state-to-state transfers with no offer back to owners, and that allows land banking. And all of the eminent domain proponents, the fighters across the country, say this is one of the worst things that you can do. So I think we need to claw that back and revert to our 2012 landowners bills of rights. And this has to do with all of the condemnation entities across the state. Okay, so one thing that I think would be a great recommendation to come from this interim study is that the state has given the power of eminent domain to several entities, not just the OTA. And every single entity has a different way of enacting eminent domain. I think that the legislature, since you are the ones that give the power to these agencies, I think you need to review all of the entities that have the state power of eminent domain and make sure that they're all following the law and doing things the correct way. And then we need to take our 2006 Supreme Court case and get it codified into law. So let's put that limit on public use. Let's ban economic development takings. We need to tighten our blight definitions. So I've just given some draft concepts that maybe the legal writers could take and run with. Of course, I'm not wed to any of this language, and Rob's going to talk a lot more about that when he talks, but I believe that we have to prove necessity. There's nothing in the plan right now. The Council on Bond Oversight doesn't have to prove necessity of the bonds. They don't have to prove that the project makes sense. They just have to say that all the numbers look okay. The Supreme Court doesn't give validity to anything. They just say they're a rubber stamping board, as the Supreme Court case in 2023 said very clearly. And so I think we need to put a clause in our eminent domain laws that require them to prove necessity with a jury trial prior to being able to enact eminent domain. Okay, and then increasing transparency and accountability. We need maybe a public roll call vote, or you have to talk to the municipality and get in there and publish your written public use findings and parcel maps before you file for condemnation. And we need to ensure fair and full compensation. Right now, Oklahoma doesn't require the state to pay more than 1% of interest on any monies that are in the court system. So we need to set our interest rates and do a lot better with people's monies. If they have to spend their money to fight it, let's not let them lose any more money by the end. And then we need to restore the right of first refusal. get rid of that clause that's in statute 27. I think we need to protect the groundwater, mineral rights, and access easements. And I think, and this is what Senator Grellner and I talked about, protecting homesteads and family farms. We need to provide enhanced multipliers and relocation assistance and preserve generational property rights. So we need a plus up, or we need relocation replacement costs rather than fair market value. And then finally, the key takeaways is, across the state, I don't feel like we're doing a great job protecting private property rights with our eminent domain laws. We're allowing wind, solar, the OTA, other people, electrical, Nextera, to come in and take land without providing just compensation or proving necessity. And we could do a lot better with that. And so what I want to see is us to restore landowner rights of reversion and first refusal, require public necessity and minimal impact hearings. I want us to codify fair compensation and transportation standards, or transparency standards. I want us to figure out what we think blight means and tighten that so we don't give blanket immunity to cities to go do what they want on that. And then I think we need to unify and limit eminent domain powers across all the agencies. I know that this talked about a lot of things, but I really feel like we can make a lot of progress working together on strengthening eminent domain and requiring municipality input like we have in the past, and also making stronger notification standards and statutes. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them at this time.
Members, any questions? Representative Sterling.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amy, I think the gist of a lot of your presentation is the issues that you see. You're giving us a lot of valuable information that could be the genesis of several pieces of legislation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wanted to find the problems in our statutes and then provide solutions where we can make really strong eminent domain laws to protect the citizens. And so there are recommendations that we can maybe work into some bills.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that's what I took away from your presentation, and I just want to make sure we was on the same page. Just a lot of useful information. As we've done in the past, Director Kelly, anything presented that you'd like to address? Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. Ms. Serrato covered a lot of information quickly. She speaks significantly faster than I do, but I did take just a couple of notes that I just wanted to briefly address. A lot of the things that she talked about have to do with strengthening some pre-existing laws. So the Turnpike Authority does not condemn property or take property or even purchase property for any economic development. It is all to build a roadway, to build a ramp, to build a connection. It is all for public use. The Turnpike Authority is not required to take a resolution for a necessity of take to our board for approval. We do that purely to be transparent. It makes it on a public agenda. It is advertised, it's posted, and our board takes action on that. Oklahoma law does currently allow property owners, when the Turnpike Authority or any condemning authority tries to use eminent domain, and when they get to the court, the property owner can challenge the necessity of take in the court and through the condemnation case. And we have had to prove that out in the past to prove that we have to have that we have a public need or a public purpose for the roadway that's being built. So, some of the things that were talked about are about strengthening that. I just wanted to make sure that it is said that some of this stuff does exist. I'd be happy to answer any question that might come. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Here. Representative Sterling, you're recognized to give us their next presenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next presenter is Tassie Hirschfeld. She would like to address some of the things that were addressed or presented in the loft presentation. Tassie, you are recognized.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for inviting us to present. I see a lot of familiar faces here and a couple of new ones, so just by way of introduction, my name is Tassie Catherine Hirschfeld. I'm a professor in the Department of Anthropology at OU. In February 2022, I was part of the original ambush of homeowners, and I will say that even 3 years later, I have not fully recovered from the emotional shock of seeing a line drawn next to my property. In my case, the announcement came not too long after the death of my husband, when I had been virtually housebound during the pandemic, and just the emotional stress and trauma of that has been so overwhelming. And so if you want to know why I'm still here 3 years later, actively trolling the Turnpike Authority and trying to share information with you, the state legislature, it's because I don't want anyone else to have to go through something like that. So we really are committed to building a better process and hopefully having a better outcome for future generations. And sure I know how to use these buttons. Okay, I'm going to focus my first 3 points on the Loft report, because we really felt like while we appreciate the effort that Loft made to provide information, it seemed quite distorted and misleading and missed some very, very important pieces. So I've boiled this down to sort of 3 fundamental points: underestimating the risk of the billions of dollars in new debt from the access projects, the non-viability of the access projects, and the Loft report's strategic avoidance of addressing the very real and feasible plan to transition Oklahoma's toll roads back to free roads as originally promised to citizens. And I will say, just for those of you who monitor our local news and social media, our Facebook group has increased to 10,000 members, and there is nonstop shouting about this issue on Facebook. The citizens are furious at still being charged tolls from a road that was built in 1957 during the Eisenhower administration, which our accountant has calculated has been paid for 7 times over. So I think it really, I do want to emphasize the importance of this issue to voters, to citizens, not just to us, but there is growing discontent that will only get worse when we get these exponential toll increases that we're expecting from the access projects. Again, so trying to go through relatively quickly, this number that the arrow is pointing to this chart comes from Loft, and it implies that the OTA's debt burden is manageable because it's a relatively small percentage of their overall operations and expenses, but this is massively misleading because there's almost no principal being paid down. The bonds are structured to postpone principal to the very end of the 30-year period. That was not always the case. And I will also say much of this research was done by my dear friend and neighbor Cheryl Pierce, who's a retired CPA. So this is a very professional analysis, far beyond my pay grade. I'm just the delivery person at this point. But she actually did an enormous number of calculations and going back through these old bond documents. And so in 1998, principal was only deferred for 5 years. By 2017, in the driving forward, that principal had been pushed back 12 to 14 years. And again, it's not all the principal, but it's the majority. On the 2023 $500 million bond issue, wow, we're up to 25 years on 30-year bonds. And then for that most recent 2025 bond issue, it's up to 28 years. And what we've seen over and over again is whenever these balloon payments get close, the Turnpike Authority refinances, generates millions of dollars in fees to banks and the bond advisor, and that principal gets kicked down the road even farther. Final fact, the double-digit toll increases that were implemented at the beginning of this year are not going to pay down any of this debt. Those interest payments are capitalized, and so what that money is doing is building up in essentially what looks like a slush fund in the general fund, and none of it is going to pay principal, and none of it is needed to pay interest right now. So technically, and Cheryl has done a lot of research into the legality of this. We actually believe it was not a legal toll increase because it was not actually required for operations or maintenance or debt service. And so here's what it looks like when it's graphed out. And these numbers are old, by the way. I didn't have time to fully update them. So you can see adding at least $8 billion, and that's just principal. If you want interest, double it. And so that's what that first chart shows, that we just have this exponential growth in debt with zero effort or initiative or motivation to actually attack the principal. And the second chart shows that OTA is definitely an outlier compared to other state agencies in terms of the growth of their debt and the ratio of their debt to their budget and their expenses. So again, I feel like it's a rhetorical question at this point, but like, why are we letting them do this? I feel like the first job of the legislature, especially in a conservative state, should be fiscal responsibility, and the growth of this debt and the failure to plan to pay principal or even assess the risk to the state as a whole from this level of indebtedness feels very irresponsible. And this is another part of the problem, and Dr. Serrato touched on this in her talk as well. And again, this is Cheryl Pierce's analysis. So from 2016 to 2026, OTA added 23 new miles of road, but the operations and maintenance budget has doubled. We cannot find a rational reason for this. Much of it seems to be IT related, but again, when you look at the rationalization for that shift to all electronic tolling, it was supposed to be cost savings because you wouldn't need toll takers anymore. So why is the operations budget getting so out of control? Again, from what I've seen in my more amateur analysis, there is zero effort to impose cost controls. There is zero managerial oversight, and Loft also touched on this very effectively. We've gone back through all the OTA meeting minutes, and the board not only never asks the question, they have never said no to anything. So really, it's like a blank check of unlimited borrowing, and the reason that the bond market is so happy to keep lending them money is that you in the legislature will not impose any limits on toll increases. And so what's going to happen when this $8 billion of debt has to be paid back is those tolls are going to become completely unmanageable for Oklahoma drivers. And so we're not even sort of into the construction cost overruns or any of those kinds of issues. All of these projects just appear non-viable, or at least not at all in the interest of citizens or drivers. So again, the viability, the takeaway message I want to give you from this slide, and I believe this also connects to points raised by Mayor Holman, there were no feasibility studies done for these projects. And again, I realize I'm perhaps overly emotional on this issue because I am very much a fan of fiscal conservatism, and reckless overspending by government agencies with no oversight disturbs me deeply. And so the Loft report, I give them credit. They did point out it will take at least 200 years to repay the access bonds, that the Council on Bond Oversight does not evaluate the merit of OTA projects, neither does the board. I was the lead plaintiff in the open meetings case. During depositions, we asked the OTA board members, when did you first learn of the Access Turnpike $5 billion expansion plan? February 22nd, 2022, the same day that we did. They asked no questions before approving all of that spending. And again, there had been no feasibility studies, which are required by the OTA's trust agreement. None of that happened for these projects, and we have found evidence that they did happen previously, so we really don't know what happened. And this slide touches on the unpopularity in the city. These are OTA's analysis. It's their public comments that we requested as open records because we really wanted to have a quantitative assessment of what was being communicated. So you can see the over 600 public comments. That tiny little 4% in blue were people who wanted those access turnpikes in Norman. 75% of the people said, no, we don't want it, and they were very passionate. So that second chart, the giant red bar is the number of words written by Norman residents in opposition to the access turnpikes. The little bitty bit in the blue were the people who had something good to say about them. And so again, it was very troubling to us that OTA misrepresented this in a public statement as, quote, about a third of the comments were in favor. So, you know, as a resident, again, very frustrated by the lack of communication, still traumatized by the 2022 ambush, and also disturbed that this was so powerfully misrepresented. Again, Cheryl Pierce, retired CPA, did this analysis. The Kickapoo Turnpike also seems to make no economic sense. It has a deficit cash flow of $13 million. It had a cost overrun, construction cost overrun of between 100 and 150 million, never explained, by the way. The OTA board does not ask questions. They just approve change orders. And so, I mean, I realize you can't see these little bitty numbers, but this is just to show you an actual professional did this. And this is the actual deficit cash flow in the Kickapoo. And finally, and I feel like this is very important, and we do have a much more detailed analysis to provide you. I know everyone's tired, no one wants to look at a lot of spreadsheets right now. But the loft conclusion was that, well, you know, this may be the best option for Oklahoma. I don't think anyone in the state feels that way. If you think of that, those public comment cards, thousands of people writing angry comments every day in our Facebook group, people want a better choice. There should be another option. And again, Cheryl, in her accounting genius, she's like, you know what, we can actually transition the toll roads to free roads in a relatively painless way. So this is her 4-step plan. One is we limit the access bond issues to the improvements. We do not do any new construction. The loop around Norman is not viable. It will be underwater economically. It's massively opposed by the city, and there's never been a feasibility study or a traffic study that has justified it. Step 2 is a 6% toll increase, increases in 2027, 2029, and 2031. Again, that's far less than it would be with the new construction. The excess toll collections, and this is important, we don't have any more slush fund in the general fund. It goes specifically to a bond redemption account to pay down principal, because that has not been happening at all. And then I know it's painful, I'm sorry, very small increase in the motor fuel tax will kind of ease that transition. I would personally, and I'm an amateur in this area, I would personally add a very small tax on tire sales, because that is also a use tax. And I think that this could be a very painless way to transition the toll road system to free roads. And she has it calibrated by 2043, and I have the handout for details. I apologize, I don't actually have a handout. But she does have all of this worked out, and so we'll be very happy to send you our step-by-step flow chart of how this actually works. So that's the main part, but I do have a couple of other points that I want to make. One, again, just to emphasize the high cost of doing nothing. I actually don't know if this is an AI-generated image or a true nightmare that exists in the city of Dallas. It's hard to know anymore. But the city of Norman does not want this. It does not need this, and the city should get a say, but the city has not been able to have a say, at least that anyone seems to be listening to. The high cost of doing nothing is that this gets bigger and bigger and bigger and less manageable, and people get angrier and angrier. And so that's not good for anyone. Citizens feel cut out of the process. Tolls are already high. Everyone's already economically stressed. And so I feel like a plan like this can give them something positive to hope for, which is it's not going to get worse going forward. So that's the main points. I had a couple of other things I wanted to mention sort of in response to things that were said earlier. And also, I feel like both in the loft report and in some of the other conversations today, a really important part of the history of the Turnpike Authority has been overlooked, and I feel like it needs to be addressed. And that is the long, undistinguished history of Senator Jean Stipe. It is common when Senator Mary Boren speaks at these issues, she will invoke Jean Stipe's legacy, but because that has not been formally written, many people don't actually know the full extent of it. Anyone younger than me is just confused. Anyone older than me shudders and says, we don't want to talk about that. But I feel like we absolutely have to talk about it. So Jean Stipe was head of the Senate Transportation Committee for decades. He was under criminal investigation from the 1960s until he was finally indicted in 2003. And that means that all of those early outer loop plans from the 1980s and the 1990s that were referenced as the starting point for Access Oklahoma were done under the dark shadow of Senator Jean Stipe. Now, he passed away, I can't remember in which year, and there is a rule that after someone dies, federal records related to them to become available to the public. So I have made some inquiries at the National Archives where I regularly do research, and have even spoken to some people who worked on prosecuting Senator Stipe. And I will tell you that the National Archives holds 37,000 pages of records relating to criminal investigations of Senator Stipe. One of the FBI agents who investigated him had a letter bomb sent to his mailbox and a mysterious fire next to his house. Now, many of those records are not yet publicly available, but just the scale of that criminality, I want to encourage you to think about when we actually talk about the history of the Turnpike Authority and why it's so unpopular in the state of Oklahoma. I can't remember who it was this morning who mentioned people coming up at dinner parties and saying, who's getting rich from the Turnpike? Well, it was definitely Senator Stipe. He was from very modest beginning, but at the time of his death, his net worth was over $27 million. He was able to bend all of the implements of government towards his own personal enrichment, and we have to, again, understand the legacy of that the ghost of that criminality remains embedded, or has not fully been exorcised, I should say, from this building. I will say also that this book, the Bribery and Corruption Case book, does feature a chapter devoted to some of the criminal activities of Mr. Stipe. It's sort of done anonymously, but I spoke to the FBI agent who wrote the chapter, and he said I was free to share it. And I also wanted to give him a shout out because he showed tremendous courage and perseverance, and I think did one of the biggest favors to the state of Oklahoma that no one knows about. So no one wants to end up in the Bribery and Corruption Handbook, yet it does seem to happen, and the steps that take people there down that path are lack of oversight, lack of transparency, lack of accountability, and that's why all of us here at Oklahomans for Responsible Transportation, 3 years in, are not tired, not bored, and not giving up, that we are going to insist that we have these things, that we fully exercise and lay to rest the ghost of Mr. Stipe and have a better, freer transportation system going forward. So thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions, representatives? Members? Nope. Representative Sterling, you're recognized.
Thank you for that information, a lot of valuable information, and just kind of reinforce what was presented by Loft. But in the spirit of what we've been doing here today, I mentioned it, I know you probably weren't here this morning, maybe you heard it, but we want to be very transparent. This process, I failed to mention in my opening statements, and I should have, that we're not only are we wanting to be transparent from the OTA standpoint, legislative standpoint, presenter standpoint, but we also, and I think Kelly might have mentioned that in her presentation, I want us to take an attitude of, okay, we realize we have some issues here, but for lack of better words, not beat up on TA, but maybe give them some tools that they could use moving forward to improve the process, the procedures. You know, me being a former principal at a high school, I was constantly having to review our handbook and our procedures each summer before the next year. So I think, you know, nothing stays stagnant. I know we talked about the projections of turnpikes that were made in the 50s for certain cities and stuff. That's changed, you know. So some of our procedures and policies, I say ours, OTAs, maybe we need to revisit those and look at that again. And again, that's something that I know the group that I met with before this presentation, or this interim study, excuse me, that's one of the things they said, hey, we want to help the OTA to make things better for the people that have been impacted. So with that being said, Director, no comment. Okay, so I covered it good. No, thank you very much. And if you want me to go ahead and introduce our next, okay. And our final presenter for the day is Mr. Rob Norman. Rob will be discussing the legal, eminent domain, and financial impacts of what goes on with the OTA and turnpike acquisitions.
Oh, good, it works. I have to make a couple of adjustments here. I'm a little taller. Now, I think that's a good way to put it, Representative Sterling, is that the tools that the OTA operates under were largely created in the 1950s, and we haven't done a whole lot with them. We've had some problems with the courts. We've had some bottlenecks in the legislature. And I want to make sure everyone understands that no one thinks that Joey Kella or Todd Gore or anyone wakes up and thinks, how can I do harm to the rank and file citizen? But what we need to do is we've got to find a way to help the rank and file citizen more. When you're part of the government, you're supposed to help the rank and file citizen, not just the elite establishment. You're not supposed to act, as Mr. Grego alluded to, you're not supposed to act as if you're kind of an adversary party, another private party in a negotiation, and withhold stuff. He mentioned, I wish he was here, he mentioned he'd never seen an appraisal in a bank refi or a bank loan. Maybe he needs to get a better banker. But in any event, it should be different when it's the government. The government is supposed to serve the people and not be trying to get the better of people in a negotiation, or not trying to keep information away from people. And like I said, some of the time it's just because the policies and procedures and the legislation isn't there. It needs to be there. It'd be great to have legislation requiring the entire appraisal report be provided to the individual homeowner as part of the landowner's Bill of Rights. I don't think the one kind of kooky thing I heard here was trying to justify not doing that because we might have to copy 70 pages. Our citizens, our landowners, our private property holders, 70 pages should not be used as an excuse to trample on their fundamental rights. That's just not the way it should be. And here, I kind of like to start with some pictures. My things, 3 years ago, I kind of started and ended with this. This is a picture of Lake Thunderbird looking toward a sunset. Until about a year ago, that sunset was going to be blocked and bisected by a turnpike. Now it's not, because the federal government told them you can't put one here. But it took a higher power. It took someone who could stand up and say, you cannot eminent domain us because it's federal property and you can't come here. Otherwise, the city was telling them, the citizens were telling them, the county was telling them, don't do this. And they had to be forced not to do this. That is a bad situation. Now here's where we talk about the South Extension, and that seems to get all the press in the pub. That's a picture of the Canadian River in the Cleveland County and Norman area. They're getting ready to try to put a 7,000-foot bridge over there. They have a lot of environmental responsibilities there and a lot of permitting responsibilities there. And I'm going to tell you that you're going to find out in the next few weeks and next few months that there has been a persistent attempt to avoid or minimize those responsibilities at that river in building that 7,000-foot bridge. I don't have time to go through it all now. I'll talk to you about it later. We know from open records requests that that's going on. But we have to make a decision. What do we want the world to look like? What do we want the world to be? Do we want to turn that into a 7,000-foot bridge with mass development along the side? Here is a farm and ranch in Norman. Do we want to send a turnpike through there? Is it necessary to send a turnpike through there? Is it necessary to send a turnpike through there and turn that into tract houses and strip malls and convenience store and gas stations? Who gets to decide that? Do bureaucrats get to decide that? Do a few developers get to decide that? Shouldn't the people get to decide that? We think so. Look at the Republican Party platform. It's been this way since 2020, and it's this way now in 2025. It basically is wind down the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority and don't build new toll roads and don't take eminent domain for new toll roads. It's time the Republican Party take their platform seriously. You heard two competing visions from a Loft person and from Tassie just a moment ago about how we can do that. We know we don't get to just, okay guys, close up shop tomorrow and it's over. That would be wreckage. But you saw a plan, a viable plan, that's quicker than what the Loft report says it is, that we can wind this Oklahoma Turnpike Authority as we know it down. The Turner, the H.E. Bailey, the Will Rogers, those were great things. Those are connected distant places. The feds didn't want to come in and do diagonal interstate highways back then. They still kind of don't. But that purpose has been served. That necessity has been served. We have rural electrification done. We have the reason for turnpikes done. They haven't been able to show the need for new routes that are going to eat up a whole lot of an $8.5 billion project. We're okay with all the operational and maintenance and updating projects on existing turnpikes. And we're okay, and we understand that it's going to be a wind-down process. It's the process of continually going into more debt and continually doing new routes to justify your existence, and yes, to basically be doing it for the purpose of economic development. Now let's look at a few eminent domain first principles. I was looking all over the place for Alexander Hamilton pictures, and there's a lot of them on the internet, but I decided to go with one with the dancer, the guy in the Broadway show, right there, Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton understood, and our founders understood, that life and the protection of property rights are the most important things that a government can do. Our founders of Oklahoma understood that too. The first rights they had to protect was the inherent right to life and the inherent right to property. And I'm not talking about just get rich and trade stocks and things like that. We're talking about homes. We're talking about the nest. To be able to live a good life, to be able to have a good family, to be able to make this work. We have to make those nests. We have to get that property. We have to have those homes. We have to build those homesteads. We have to farm. We have to ranch. We have to do those things. And it's not okay to just blow through them to make a turnpike without establishing necessity, and it's not okay to blow through someone's home just to decide, well, I want to do homes a different way. Or I want to have convenience stores and gas stations and things like that. And look what our own Supreme Court has said over and over and over again. We construe our eminent domain provisions strictly in favor of the owner and against the condemning party. I would tell you that's a lot of lip service, and when you go around the courts in Oklahoma, it doesn't end up working that way. Then look, where did kind of the whole concept of eminent domain start? Look at this last slide. There didn't used to be this idea of eminent domain. Kings just used to take property. Nobles just used to take property. We decided there was a better way to do it. First, you have to have a legitimate public purpose. Second, there has to be a necessity. And it all starts with our good colonies transitioning from colonies into a nation. There was an old 1700 law, colonial law, that said no such road shall be carried through any man's improved lands, but where there is a necessity for the same. And we've kind of lost that thought and that train of thought. Okay. Here, the pre-condemnation process. We talked some about the resolution of necessity. Mr. Akella said we don't have to have a resolution of necessity to start a condemnation. Well, yes and no. We don't have to give a board a resolution of necessity. Well, case law in the Oklahoma Supreme Court says that the condemning authority, whether they be the OTA, and by the way, we probably need to do an interim study on eminent domain 2.0. That would be great. When I say OTA, I'm also talking about other condemning authorities. You do at the very least have to come in with a resolution of necessity if you are going to satisfy your burden of showing necessity once you get in the case. The OTA should not be allowed to pass any resolution of necessity, which is basically just a Word document that's a rubber stamp process, until it has obtained all permits. They don't have any of them here yet from the federal government. They're going to be required to get some from the city of Norman, floodplain ordinance permits. It's not an automatic. Joe Akella was right. It ain't automatic. We're going to hold their feet to the fire. The city of Norman is going to hold their feet to the fire. We're going to make sure the federal government holds their feet to the fire. They should not be able to pass any resolution of necessity, go after any homeowner until they have done their job, until they have gone through the permitting process, finished their environmental studies, and performed all other legally required due diligence for a turnpike project. The OTA does it backwards. ODOT has to do all this stuff before they move forward. The OTA does it backwards. The OTA says, here comes the turnpike. We're doing the turnpike. It's a done deal. And then they start with all these processes, but they're really they're just going to confirm what they're going to do, and they're not going to change their decision to build a turnpike. I think we talked about before, the landowner should be entitled to receive the entire appraisal report together with all the reports and documentations that the OTA or any condemning authority, I don't care who it is, private, public, quasi-public, has compiled before we get to the point of making an offer and before we get to the point of making an acquisition. And here, the OTA and its right-of-way contractors should not treat the process like it's an adversarial one. They're supposed to be looking out for the citizens at large. They're supposed to be looking out for the landowner. They have to protect the landowner's rights. They should be telling them, kind of like the police have to on the streets when they arrest someone, you have the right to an attorney. Now, let's hold back and not go through anything anymore until we give you time to digest all these things, until we give you time to get an attorney. And if you don't want to get an attorney, fine. But it shouldn't be something where it's a right-of-way contractor, and often it is a right-of-way contractor, not the OTA itself, thinking they have to get the better of the landowner. Right now, showing public purpose and necessity. Here's where the legislation isn't good enough. Right now, all the condemning authority has to do is come in with its resolution of necessity, and they've satisfied their burden. Then, even though it's a fundamental right of the landowner, the burden of proof shifts to the landowner to prove either abuse of discretion, bad faith, or fraud on the part of the condemning authority. The burden of proof should never, ever, ever shift to the landowner to disprove the necessity of the taking. There should not be a presumption in favor just because they have that piece of paper that this is necessary or it's done for public use. The landowner should be entitled to come in, of course, and admit evidence, but the condemning authority needs to come through and show they've done all their due diligence, to show what they've done, to show that this is necessary, and sustain their burden of proof by a preponderance of the evidence. And in many states, they do. Here again, we see our farm. Look at the Michigan Constitution. You got a little bit of this from Amy Serrato. The Michigan Constitution, they had to do this through an initiative petition. Now, I'm going to be here to tell you right now that this is not really at root an OTA problem. This is at root something that the legislature and the courts need to step up to fix. The OTA operates, sometimes we're critical about the way they operate, but they operate with no guardrails. And anyone who operates with no guardrails is not going to drive between the lanes. They're going to drive wherever they want to. They're going to tend to do that. That's the way they're going to be. It's just a natural inherent tendency. Here, in Michigan's Constitution, and if the legislature doesn't do it, I can tell you there are people running for office right now, there are people in office right now in the legislature who are looking out hard for the rank and file people's properties rights and looking out hard for serious eminent domain reform. And if it doesn't happen at the legislative level or if it doesn't happen in the courts, the people are going to retake control of the situation, and they're going to do it. Whether they have to do it through electing officials who will do things right, or whether they have to do it through the initiative petition process. Here in Michigan, the burden is always on the condemning authority to prove necessity and to prove public purpose. If it's for blight, it's a clear and convincing burden of proof. Public use does not include economic development or enhancement of tax revenues. That's already the case in Oklahoma, but right now in Oklahoma, our problem is it's just a judicial decision, and most of those judges are gone, and the two judges who are still on the court who made that decision of no eminent domain for economic development actually dissented from that opinion. So I think that opinion is at risk. We introduced some legislation a couple of years ago to codify that, and somehow it got bottlenecked. I think there's a lot of legislation, if we can just get it to the floor, that's going to pass. But we go through too many bottlenecks. Right now, Senator Standridge is trying to get, what is it, Senate Bill 80? Is trying to get Senate Bill 80, which is kind of a version 2.0 of a comprehensive OTA reform process bill through the legislature. Tried last year. I think Representative Sterling had a version, was working on it in the House. I think they both got through committee, but then they both started getting poison pills inserted in them. And quite frankly, we said, we don't want that. We don't want a reform bill that gets a poison pill inserted into it that makes it useless in the end. And that kind of stuff has got to stop. When the rank and file people and the rank and file legislators want reform at the OTA, and I don't think the OTA really objects to some reform, to having better guidance on what they can do. I don't get that sense whenever we meet about this kind of thing down at the Capitol. But someone is putting bottlenecks in these bills, and that has got to stop. And if we see bottlenecks going in the bills, we're going to stop it again, and we're going to try to do it somewhere else. But things like Senate Bill 80, things like comprehensive reform, things like codifying no eminent domain for economic development, these things need to pass and stop be bottlenecking. And here you heard a gentleman property owner earlier today talk about, and you've heard Amy talk about, the notion that we should fix fair market value at more than 100% of the appraisal. Compensation at more than 100% of the appraisal. Here in Michigan, they go 125. There are more and more states, Missouri 150. There are more and more states that are saying, for example, if it's your primary residence, because I think I remember some questions earlier today. I was multitasking about, well, what if it's someone's primary residence? You don't just compensate that by giving them fair market value on an appraisal. That's true. We need to compensate those people who have been there forever, and their nest is their castle. Their home is their castle. We need to compensate them more than just something that comes out in an appraisal. So for primary residences, 125%, 150%, those are great ideas. There's a good old Lake Thunderbird again. I talked about this earlier. Here's something Florida does about necessity. Florida, which has become a pretty conservative state, and is pretty both recognizes property rights and recognizes environmental needs and recognizes natural resource needs, which I think is in line with Oklahoma, quite frankly. In Florida, a condemning authority to show necessity, here's some things they have to do. Availability and consideration of alternatives to what they're doing. Do we need this turnpike? Do we need more high-speed highways? Do we need to plow it through Norman? That's the thing a lot of people don't understand about this deal. I had this conversation with John Bowman and Christine McCullough very early on in the process at the first town hall in Norman. And I've had this talk with some other folks who just don't get that, who don't live in Norman. Mayor Holman told you that much of Norman, most of its landmass is rural. We think of it as the university, this big old densely developed core, the third largest city, growing, vibrant. Most of it is, if I can go back to that farm and ranch land thing, most of Norman is that. It's a lake. It's farms and ranches. It's parkland. It's things like that. And most of these turnpike mileage seeks to plow through that. And what most people don't understand is that was annexed as part of Norman as a promise to those landowners out there that the city of Norman won't let that become a city. And That's kind of unique and special in Norman, that people from outside think of it as a city, and then they start to look and they see all this green space out there, and they think, well, gosh, what's been in the way of developing all this? You know, there's something in the way. You know, if we just put some more roads in there, maybe some turnpikes and things like that, we can turn this green space into gray space. And that is the gambit here. We're trying to do it the east-west connector, Kilpatrick 2.0. We're trying to do it the south extension on the wrong side of the lake. What we're trying to do is more Kilpatrick 2.0. But what people don't understand, and what the problem is with the OTA not collaborating and working consistently with the city, is Norman is not supposed to be that. And this is not the whole diagonal of the Turner, the H.E. Bailey, and the Will Rogers, where we have a whole bunch of space and we have to take a whole bunch of people into account. Most of this stuff is plowing through rural Norman. Most of the problem of this stuff is plowing through rural Norman, where for environmental reasons, for natural resource protection, for property rights protection, we were never supposed to have this. Now in Florida, I could walk into court and I could win an eminent domain case right then and there on those grounds. We talk about Florida has a lot of turnpike miles, but turnpikes get defeated in Florida on those grounds. Eminent domain projects get defeated on those grounds because they don't consider they have to consider the availability of alternatives. They have to consider costs, the things we saw in the Loft report. They have to consider environmental and natural resource preservation. They have to consider long-range area planning. Was it part of the municipality's plan to have this? Are you violating the fundamental core precept, the pillar of the municipality, that it's part of the city that won't become the city? Safety considerations, that too. And you can lose an eminent domain case in Florida if you're a condemning authority and you don't go through this process. And I think there's very good reason for that. In Florida, actually, to build a turnpike, before you get permission to build the turnpike, you have to go through this process administratively. And then if you get in an eminent domain case later on and take property, you have to do that too. And Oklahoma doesn't have any of that. Here's some more specific reforms. I talked about 125 to 150% compensation for primary residences. Business owners and tenants with established businesses taken should be entitled to cover lost profits. Right now, tenants and businesses can take it on the cheek in these things. Established businesses and tenants can really get interfered with. I have a business client who was part of some of the original litigation that got moved out of the path when they had to move the south extension, who was going to be destroyed by that. And they were the type of business that would usually be in an urban area, but they were out by the lake. They're a heating and air contractor. And they were of great advantage to the people out there because they could get out there and service their needs, and that would have been destroyed. We need to enact more of what the Uniform Relocation Assistance Act provides. And here's what we specifically need to do. The OTA and other condemning authorities do have to provide moving expenses because the Oklahoma Supreme Court has said so. But what they don't provide, and they do need to provide, are the price differential factors, especially in this economy where rents are going up, mortgages are going up, home values are going up. Under the Uniform Relocation Assistance Act, you're entitled to be truly made whole. The condemning authority has to find an appropriate comparable property for you in the area. You don't have to move until they do that, and if your mortgage is going to go up, if your down payment's going to be higher, if your price is going to be higher, they have to actually compensate you for that. And the cool thing about it is it doesn't constitute income for your income tax, which it shouldn't. You get compensated for those things, and you do not by the OTA or any other condemning authority right now. That absolutely needs to be incorporated into legislation with housing shortages, unhoused problems, the lack of affordable housing all over the state. It's a huge problem in Norman, as you might expect, a big suburb in the Oklahoma City area. Prices going up, 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 up. The little houses cost too much now. So someone who's been in their nest forever is not going to find, as you heard from the landowner here earlier today, is not going to find a comparable property in the area without some additional make-whole assistance. It's kind of like what we do with eminent domain right now. If any of you know a little bit about insurance, you can have an actual cash value policy, or you can have a replacement cost property. An actual cash value policy just kind of gives you what you're in is worth. A replacement cost policy, if your home is destroyed, makes you whole for the true replacement of your home, even if it's more expensive than the so-called fair market value of your home right now. We absolutely need to do that. And here another one, abutting landowners. That came up earlier today. Abutting landowners, the people right up against the turnpike, need to have some right to compensation. We ran a bill, I don't know if Kate Contreras is there, it's right there, right there. She had the idea, she wrote it up, I lawyered it up some, and we went down to the legislature, and we got into a knockdown, drag-out fight about it at first, and then we did the way, how the legislative process should work. We got committee chairs, we got the head of the OTA, we got Kate, we got a bunch of us, we got ourselves, we got Trey Caldwell, who was the chair of the committee that needed to get it through at the time. We walked in, there were pro-turnpike people, there were anti-turnpike people, we were here, and we talked it out. And Trey Caldwell, we walked in, and he wanted to have no business with this, but we made our case, and he finally said, you know, I see the merit in your case right now. You've presented, I see the merit in your case right now, and we walked out with a path for abutting landowner compensation that kind of took care of the issues that might be undue burden on the OTA, but kind of took care of the problem with the homeowner who has no judicial remedy for that right now. It's well established. They have no judicial remedy for that right now. For all that noise, that additional air pollution, unless there's a catastrophic flood that happens from a turnpike, and that's another subject, they have no remedy for that right now. We walked out with a path, and once again, somewhere a roadblock was put up against it. And we need to get past that kind of stuff, what I call minority roadblocks, what I call, you get a good bill, you know it has wide support on the floor if it gets to the floor. Maybe it even gets through committee, but then things go haywire. That is not doing the people's business, and we've got to start doing the people's business with property rights in Oklahoma. There, that just kind of, if you want to look at it, we can turn this into a handout, tells you the difference between the Uniform Relocation Assistance Act, and again, we could put, this is ODOT versus OTA, but we could put anyone who has to do what ODOT does and any other condemning authority who doesn't here. This talks about you get replacement housing payments, the price differential. If your mortgage goes up, they have to get you set up in a deal. They have to give you compensation that makes your payment the same as it was before, even if the interest rate's going to go up. They have to give you an increased down payment. If you're paying for it whole and not getting a mortgage, and it's going to cost too much for you to get in comparable property, and they don't have to pay you $1 million or something like that. It's reasonable compensation for price differentials to get into comparable property. I think that's a big takeaway of what we have to do here today, especially in this economic environment of skyrocketing and unaffordable housing. Lots of incidental expenses that you don't get with the OTA, you get with ODOT. All those, and advisory services. Under the Uniform Relocation Assistance thing, we talk about it shouldn't be an adversary proceeding. The regulations under that provide that ODOT and some other folks kind of have to put an ombudsman for the citizen in place to kind of look after the citizen's rights, to make sure the citizen is being taken care of properly, an advocate for the citizen. And again, if we're going to say, oh, that's too much red tape, I'm going to say, well, your priorities are in the wrong place. This is government trying to take people's property. This is not trying to stifle business. And if you think it stifles business, guess what? You've again got your head in the wrong place. We need to take care of the rank and file citizen. We need to do what's right by the rank and file citizen. We need to make sure a turnpike is necessary. We need to make sure if we determine it's necessary that we make the homeowner whole without them having to go out and get someone like me, and I can tell stories, other stories, war stories, to rebut what the OTA has had to say this morning, and I don't think that's really that relevant now. And really, it's kind of due process of law. We've got to put some reasonable guardrails on the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority. We've got to give the homeowner a chance to come in and prove that these turnpikes aren't necessary. You hear the stories, we go back and forth with who's right about the Loft report. Who's right about whether we need these turnpikes? Is it for economic development or not? Well, we need to have that case vetted through the eminent domain process. We need to have that case vetted through a full and fair proceeding that homeowners and rank and file citizens get due process. We don't get that right now. The OTA just comes out with something. We only ask, do they have legislative authorization for their route? That should be only the beginning of the story. And believe me, that's still a controversy here. It's not like that's still was the subject of fractured Supreme Court opinions. And look at what Kansas and Florida do again. Local government input is required prior to getting permission to build a turnpike. In Florida, proposed projects must be consistent with local government comprehensive plans. And I think that's especially so when a turnpike or a high-speed highway of any type, whether it's ODOT or OTA, is going to primarily run through and impact a small, insular, discrete part of a community. You know, I kind of close with the way what we've come to is a problem. They tried to do this either the OTA or the ODOT way in 1999. They came to the people of central Oklahoma and the south end of the metro, and they did it the right way. Neil McCaleb, then the transportation czar, Frank Keating, the governor, decided to do it the right way. They came to the people first and they said, what do you think of this? We're going to have public hearings. We're going to take public comment. We're going to take into account what rank and file people think about this. They knew they were on thin ice with their legislative authorizations, and they tried to get legislation to authorize routes. And what happened was the people in the legislature said no. And the people saying a no was enough for Neil McCaleb, Frank Keating, and the government back then to say, okay, we're not going to do it. That's the way things should have been done here. And if we are going to do it, if we are going to still consider doing it, we need to decide whether it's necessary. We need to decide whether it's a pretext for economic development, which we think it is. You know, Joe Kelly said, we're not doing it for economic development, we're doing it for roads. But that just begs the question of why you're building the roads. As one Supreme Court justice said in the dissent on the cases that decided that they had legislative authorization to do it, he said, the record is replete with evidence that you can't do these routes. Right now, even though for the moment, bare majorities ruled against us on that case, I would tell you the record is replete with evidence that these routes aren't necessary, that these routes are being done as a pretext for economic development, and both of those reasons are unlawful trampling upon citizens' fundamental property rights. And you guys need to take the bull by the horns and do some reform that we've outlined here. And it's coming, and you need to start listening to us. And obviously that's what you're doing today. You're listening to both sides. But I'm telling you, it's coming. And we need to stop the bottlenecks in the legislature. I think the majority of you agree that we need some reform, and we need some guardrails on the OTA, and we need some guardrails on all condemning authorities. But let's do it. Let's stop letting bottlenecks get in the way, and let's do it. Okay, any questions?
Members, any questions? Representative Sterling.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. You You covered a lot of information, very useful information, and I know myself will definitely go back and digest that and glean through it and see what we can do. This is not going to be a process, as you said, others have said today, that we're going to take care of overnight. This is going to be a process that has been entrenched for years, and as I stated earlier, there's always room for improvement, obviously, and we'll definitely be conferring with many of you who contributed here today. I'm talking on not just myself, but I think a lot of my colleagues as well. I'm sure Senator Standridge will concur that there will be a lot of conversations on her side in her chamber, and that's not only with the contributors that I'm going to use the word anti-turnpike, but also with the OTA and anybody else that supports what the OTA is trying to do right now as well. So we've got to get to your point. We got to get everybody at the table, and I like what I wasn't involved in the meeting you referred to with Chairman Caldwell, but I think maybe we need to revisit that and look at that again. And this was a study, but maybe we need to look at, just thinking out loud here, get in here and flesh this thing out of good again, like y'all have in the past, and use that as a springboard to move forward. I'd just like to make a few closing. Oh, sorry, Representative.
Are you going to go into your closing?
Yes.
Hold on a second. Hey, like we've done with other presenters, I want to give Director E. Kelly an opportunity to speak.
Sorry there, I forgot to do that. I was going to do something.
This is the piece of paper being passed around is something I intended to bring and pass out earlier because it is a question that we get routinely, and that is who owns the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority bonds. This is a list that was pulled on October the 8th of this year. It is not, there's a disclaimer at the bottom that obviously says this is not all of the bondholders that hold Turnpike Authority bonds. This doesn't include any private owners, but this is a snapshot in a moment because they are traded on the open market, but I wanted to share that. I want to cover just a couple of things that were covered earlier today, if I may, just briefly. And I'm trying to be respectful of everyone's time. I will go through this quickly. One of the things that was illustrated earlier is the change in the cost of the Access Oklahoma program. When we announced that program, it was a 15-year long-range plan announced at $5 billion. $5 billion. Those numbers were using the construction cost prices from 2021. So every quarter, the Department of Transportation uses our bid quantities, their bid quantities, consolidates that. That's how we estimate the cost of the project. So when Director Gatz at the time stood at the podium and said, this is a 15-year long-range plan estimated to be $5 billion, that number was in 2021 dollars, and we said that then. What we've come back with is the $8.2 billion. We're still within that. That is now forecasting the projects forward, anticipating future inflation, and anticipating current inflation, which has been significant just in the last 5 years. We've all experienced that both at home and in the construction industry, especially the highway construction industry, because so many things that we purchase have to be and are required to be American steel, American made. We've experienced even inflation above what you've seen maybe in a grocery store. The number that was in the Loft report quotes an $8.7 billion number. I want to clarify what that is. That is inclusive of the Gilcrease Expressway West project. So the bond program is 8.2. That's on our cross-pledge network. That's the new alignments that have been discussed in Cleveland County and McLean County. It's inclusive of widening the Turner Turnpike, adding all of the interchanges. That's the 8.2. There's another $500 million that is associated with the program, but it's really a separate funded project that's currently, the details haven't been worked out on that. We've been visiting with the city of Tulsa, Tulsa County, ODOT, about what that project would look like and how it would move forward. It is currently a City of Tulsa project, so I just wanted to clarify that. Earlier, we talked just a little bit about traffic studies. The Turnpike Authority does and is required to do a traffic and revenue study before we enter the bond market. So we have to forecast, using the most recent data, future revenues generated by growing traffic. They are conservative in their estimates of growth. They are also conservative in their estimates of what we will be able to collect. And so we do traffic and revenue studies. There are traffic numbers associated with the new alignments, both immediately after it opens and turned into revenue, and forecasted forward a certain number of years that I don't have in front of me. There is also a differing number that has to do with the design traffic number. So when we design a roadway, you want to design for future growth. So I said for revenue, we're assuming a conservative number. For design-wise, you want to assume a much more liberal number, something that's going to be much larger. So our design plans that we have published on our website, you can get to them at accessoklahoma.com. Once they hit a 60% design set of plans, we are posting those. On those traffics, on the title sheet, it'll have a design traffic for a future. That's going to be higher because we are designing for more than maybe what the traffic and revenue consultant assumes. So we have done some traffic studies, and those are being made. Both those numbers are available. The most recent traffic and revenue study was done when we sold bonds back in January of this year. Oklahoma City is the 20th largest city. I'm double checking that, looking at Director Gatz to make sure, but Oklahoma City is the 20th largest city in the country. Every city, and you can look up the list and look at every city that's smaller than Oklahoma City and the several that are larger, they all have loops around the city. Ms. Serrato referred to it, I think she left. Oh, no, she left. Referred to them as rings. We call them loops. All of the major metropolitan cities in our country, all of the major metropolitan cities around the world, if they can, they have a loop around them to facilitate traffic that's not bound for downtown, that's just trying to get around the edge or just trying to make a right or left turn as they approach a city. So we're trying to fulfill that with Access Oklahoma. That's one of the things that we are trying to do. Overall, our goal is to keep our tolls low. We're one of the lowest in the country. We are not lower than Kansas. Kansas hasn't built anything in a long time. They're collecting, they're doing heavy maintenance. But we compare very favorably with Kansas when you look at the heavy traffic that we carry and the amount of truck traffic that we carry on our network here in our state. Comment was made earlier that talked about the Turnpike Authority Board passing the items that are brought before the board. The director of the Turnpike Authority is responsible for putting together that agenda every month. I don't come up with agenda items that are going to create a no vote. We come up with things, we create and enter into contracts and bring change orders that have been fully vetted and are good for our state, good for the Turnpike Authority, and save money in a lot of cases. We vet those with our Turnpike Authority Board. We provide them with a copy of the agenda. They call our experts, whoever's going to be introducing that item, to get clarification. There's a lot of conversation that goes. And again, I'm charged with putting together that agenda with staff, and so we don't take agenda items that are going to be controversial or going to receive no votes. That's just part of what every city manager or that's reporting to a board tries to do. There was a little bit of discussion about cost overruns. If you look at the original, and I'm talking about the Driving Forward program, when you talk about change orders and supplemental agreements, it ran around 3.35%, and I remember that number because I calculated it. We were 3.35% of project growth. Those were fast-paced projects, lots of incentive across virgin alignment ground. We didn't do a pothole, we didn't do a drill, a core every 20 feet, so that we encountered some differing site conditions with those projects. All Kickapoo was being constructed, the John Kilpatrick was being constructed, and we were widening the Turner Turnpike. We experienced record rainfall in our state. The governor issued a proclamation for an emergency. Under those proclamations, we extend project time. There was additional costs associated with that. So part of that 3.35% is associated with that. All of our projects that we let to contract, our project growth is going to be right around 1.5%. So that's all the changes that occur on what could be an 8-mile long project. I have two things that I am not the expert in that I'd like to ask Jordan Perdue to visit about really quickly. One of them being refunding, and one of them being the strategic way that we capitalize interest on bonds that are issued, if that's okay.
You bet. Mr. Perdue, you're recognized.
Thank you. Jordan Perdue, Senior Financial Analyst and Legislative Liaison for the Turnpike Authority. Building on what Director E. Kelly said, maintaining a low toll rate is paramount to what we do, and a big part of that is refinancing our outstanding debt. We look at every opportunity to lower the interest of our outstanding debt. We saved over $12 million just this past October when we closed on the Series 2025B refunding bonds. That's not a check we get in the mail, but it's just lowering your debt service payment going forward. It's like refinancing your house. A key part of that is we do not extend the length of the debt. So we tie the refunding bonds to the bonds that are being refunded. So if we're refunding maturity in 2038, that's the final one. That's as far as we go. We don't go beyond that. So we are not refinancing ourselves into perpetuity. And another piece of what Director E. Kelly was talking about was how we layer our debt. When we go to the bond market, we are not just looking at our standalone issue for that. So take 2023 bonds and the 2025A bonds. Those are new money bonds to fund the Access program. We look at our entire debt profile, inclusive of all the outstanding debt, and we layer it on where appropriate. So I have this schedule, and I can pass these out. I don't have extra copies now, but I can get those to you guys later. But where the principal payments start is 2035. And then if you look at the total principal and interest from that point on to 2055, it's all level, $194 million, give or take a couple $100,000. That's a strategy that's very common in the bond market. It allows us to remain flexible. And so those last two maturities on the 2025A bonds, those are backloaded because the 2023 ended in 2053. So you issued 30-year bonds, and the last two maturities on the 2025, you're allowed to, or what we do is kind of backload those to maintain that level debt service throughout the entire length of our debt service schedule. And so that's why we take this approach of layering on the debt the way we do. So.
Thank you. I really thought that would generate some questions. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come up here and visit at the end. I did see that Director Bertram walked back in the room, and Director Gatz is here. I don't know if either of them would like to say anything, or if the committee would allow them to, but we're here to answer any questions. I know all three of us are happy to try to address anything that the committee has.
Thank you, Director E. Kelly. We appreciate you being here, and Director Gatz, thank you for being here for the LOFT presentation as well, and for all of our presenters today. Representative Standard, do you have any closing remarks? No? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just make some closing remarks real quick. I apologize for almost overlooking you there at the end because that's the process that we've been following. But I just make some notes. I'll refer to these, make sure I don't leave anything out because, like I say, this is very important issue that's occurring in our state and will be occurring in our state and has occurred in our state. But I know as legislators, we're hopefully going to glean and process what all we have been presented here today as for whether there is a need for potential future legislation also that's related to this matter, and even look at their current legislation that's still alive to maybe modify that and make some changes because we want to hopefully help the OTA, as I mentioned earlier, to arm them with some tools and some ideas that maybe will help help the situation, help the process out moving forward. I truly appreciate all of our presenters here today. As Representative Johns talked about, whether you agreed or disagreed with everything on what was presented today, I hope that we continue to have conversations, as I alluded to that earlier with Mr. Norman and with Mr. Kelly, that I think we need to maybe look at a different platform than an interim study now. I think we've transitioned from here to maybe let's get back down to the nitty-gritty, as I call it, and just be able to be a lot more informal, because I think we can get a lot more done that way. I just want to challenge the OTA, I guess a personal comment here, to be very mindful, and I think they're going to be, but I just want to put it in, I want to verbalize it. Be very mindful that affected property owners are many times the victims of something they did not initiate or create. I think that's a given. So I implore you to be ready to internalize what has been presented today, to scrutinize everything, the way you do your business that is currently being conducted by your agency. And I think, I feel like that's going to be done. I trust people till they show me I can't trust them. And I feel like that there's no reason why we can't scrutinize the way things are done now, review them and look for ways to make improvements because, again, it's our constituents, all of us that are sitting here at this table, we have constituents that send us up here to conduct business, pass legislation or defeat legislation that affects them. And so I feel like that's incumbent upon us to listen to all the information that we can gather concerning this particular information or this particular matter, to go back and make the best decisions when the session begins on legislation, and hopefully we will do things that will be helpful to all 4 million Oklahomans, but also specifically I'm really looking at for my constituents to do what's best for them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us. Senator Standridge, appreciate your attendance and help with this, and that's all I have.
Well, thank you, Representative Sterling and Senator Standridge. Thank you for bringing this forward. Appreciate all the conversations that we have had today. And members, thank you for being here. And it's been a long day, and so we are dismissed.